Forgiveness is so tricky sometimes, and it's super important because that's part of the repair process in our relationships, but we resist it. And so I want to give you a different way to think about it that might help you if you're struggling with forgiveness. I'm Stacy Rocklein, and it's my mission to eradicate loneliness. And the way we create loneliness in our relationships is by not doing repair. And by not doing repair, we end up with a wedge between us that makes us feel isolated and alone. So let's just break this down a little bit. An event happens and it feels like it's just in that one moment, but it's actually usually really complicated. It's all the circumstances that were true at that time. It's the people that were involved. It's also what season of life those people were in, what their state was. And so it's a lot of different things, but our brain really likes to simplify things. So let's do an example. Something that I've helped many women with in their relationships is infidelity. So infidelity happens, and again, this is complicated. Here's one way that surprisingly happens frequently, is that a person reaches out on direct message to somebody. So that has to do with the person who's doing the reaching out and where they are and what need they are trying to meet and what void is happening in their life and what's going on, why they want this connection. Then it has to do with the state of the person who's being reached out to and what their needs are that aren't being met and what void is in their life. And so if they're in a relationship with someone, that sometimes has to do with the state of the relationship. Not always. It can just be entirely about the person, but sometimes it's about the state of the relationship. And it's definitely about communication that hasn't happened, about needs that aren't being met or what support that person needs. And it can be about the state of the other person in the relationship. It's so complicated. And so somebody reaches out, then there's this connection on direct messaging and they start a conversation. And then somebody chooses to take it into a different direction. And then they both go there. And all of a sudden this snowballs into something pretty serious. And our brain wants to do this thing where it wants to make it real simple because our brains love simplicity, love to just understand something in a very black and white way. And so it goes, oh, here's what happened. That person did me wrong. And the person who reached out to them did me wrong, right? It's very easy. It's focus on that person and the thing that they did. And so you get the simplicity, which is great, but you also, in simplifying it, you make it really protective. You have to protect yourself from that person. You have to protect yourself from the person reaching out, right? By focusing entirely on it being their fault, you also don't have to look at yourself. And I am not saying at all that anybody should ever betray you, that is ever okay, that when you've made a promise to be loyal to each other, that it's ever okay for somebody to keep a secret or step out on you or whatever it is. That's not what I mean. What I mean is, in the relationship, something has gone wrong. Not that you've done anything wrong, but maybe communication hasn't been strong enough for the other person to share how they're feeling, if they're feeling neglected or they're feeling alone. And so there are things often that we could have done, and we use those just to learn from them, not to carry around guilt or shame. But when we focus all of our fault outside of us, then we don't get a chance to grow from those things. So our brain's protecting us too by doing that's all their fault. So then when it comes down to forgiveness, it feels like we have to forgive the other person. And we resist it because it feels unsafe. It feels unprotective. It feels like we're making ourselves vulnerable to further hurt. And so we struggle with it. So I want you to think about forgiveness in a little bit different way. I want you to think about it, instead of the person, focus on the event that happened. This was a thing that happened outside of both of you, right? Yes, it had all the circumstances involved and the people involved and all that thing, but let's just remove it for a minute and put it out here. And what you're doing is you're taking a machete to this event. You're saying, I'm cutting myself away from this event so that I can be free from it. so that I don't have to be stuck. I don't have to be in a dark place because of it. I don't have to keep myself from growing. And you're cutting away the relationship from it as well so that you potentially can grow from it. That isn't to say there aren't going to need to be changes, but you, instead of focusing on the blame and the person, you are releasing yourself from that event. And you can't release the other person, only they can release themselves. That's why sometimes you've moved on and the other person is just stuck to a mistake they've made because they have not self-forgiven and cut themselves away from the event. So rather than resisting forgiveness because that feels protective and safe, what you can do is you're separating this into two different things. One, machete to the event. You're cutting yourself free from this event through the process of forgiveness. You're thinking about forgiveness more in a release, a letting go, a liberation for yourself. And two, you're thinking about how do you do the protection without withholding forgiveness? What do you need? Maybe you need a relationship ending. That sometimes happens. Maybe you need boundaries. All relationships need boundaries, but this might have to be a really specific, clearly placed boundary. And boundary work is actually kind of tricky. You can get some help with my Loving Boundaries course. And the reason it's tricky is because we think about it as like a one-time conversation, but it's actually a whole process. There is deciding if a boundary is the right thing or not. It's not always the right course of action. Then figuring out what exactly that looks like. What are you willing to do? What makes sense here? Then how do you communicate it in a way that doesn't trigger the other person and that actually, helps it be a successful boundary? And then how do you manage how you feel in the process? Because a lot of emotions come up in boundary settings. So you need to work on all of those different pieces in order to have a really successful boundary setting situation. And I teach those in that class with videos, transcripts, audio, and a workbook so that you can prep yourself before you go into boundaries. So the reason that is important is because sometimes you're going to machete yourself from an event, you're going to set yourself free from an event, and you're going to have people in your life who are still going to do those things again. And you want to be in a relationship with them, but you don't want to continue to be hurt. And that's why you don't withhold forgiveness, because that's good for your heart to forgive and move on and not tether yourself to the past. But also, you need to be able to protect yourself because the boundaries are what create that safe environment so that we can continue to eradicate loneliness by staying connected to each other. Okay, grab that if you need help with boundaries, and I will see you next time.